Hello and welcome back to A Book a Day podcast. Once again, we are discussing Sam Dalrymple's book Shattered Lands, Five Partitions and the Making of the Modern Asia. And this is the final episode in this series where we will talk about the fifth and the final partition. So far, we covered India's partition with Burma, then India's partition with the Arab states. Remember, we are talking about the British India here. And then there was India's partition with Pakistan, and then within India, the division or the partition, and then accession of the princely states. There were so many princely states, 550 plus of them. So that's what we covered so far. Now we're talking about the final partition, which is when Bangladesh came into existence, when East and West Pakistan that got partitioned, and the East Pakistan became Bangladesh. How did that happen? Let's talk about that. So remember, after 1947, when India and Pakistan had come into existence, there was still a lot of tension between the two states. First of all, they had fought war over Kashmir in 1948. Then once again in 1965, they had fought war once again for Kashmir. And then these two nations, they were going after each other through proxy wars. Pakistan, on one hand, was playing its proxy wars in the northeast of India so that various tribes like Naga tribes, they could get independence from India. And at the same time, India was also trying to cause certain proxy wars in the east of Pakistan, which was going to be Bangladesh at that time. So in 1960s, it was Mujibur Rahman who was the elected president of the Awami League Party in the then Bengal province of East Pakistan, who raised voice for the rights of Bengalis, because what was happening at the time was that the East Pakistan, the Bengal that was, they were not getting as much rights or as much funding as the West Pakistan was getting. And in fact, when majority of the population lived in East Pakistan, the resources that were being spent on Pakistan, most of them, they were diverted to West. Also, there was this concern about the language imposition, because years ago when Jinnah went to the East Pakistan, he insisted that the Urdu should be the national language, and Urdu wasn't the language of the majority then, Bengali was. And yet this was a problem that many Bengalis faced, that the language imposition was taking place. So in 1966, Mujib came up with this 6-point demand, and that somehow became the central issue in Pakistani politics. What were these 6 points? The first one was that there should be a federation of Pakistan on the basis of the Lahore Resolution. Okay. The second, the federal government should be limited to defense and foreign affairs. That means he was asking for more rights for the provinces. The third one was there should be two separate currencies for the two wings, or measures to stop capital flight from east to west. So he was demanding for separate currencies for two sides of the country. Then the next demand was the center should have no tax raising powers. Once again, more rights for the province. Next one was foreign exchange earnings of each wing should remain with each wing. Again, financial autonomy. And the final one was a militia or paramilitary force for East Pakistan should be set up. Because at that time, many Bengalis felt that they were not properly represented in the army, on the military forces, and they were not feeling secure about it. So that's why they demanded some kind of militia or paramilitary force for the East Pakistan. But the trouble was, instead of agreeing to his demands, the the Pakistani government went after him because they had the suspicion that he was getting close to the Indian intelligence or the Indian leadership. And Mujib's trial, which was dubbed as Agartala conspiracy case, which meant that he had met the Indian leadership in Agartala in the northeast of India, and so he was put in jail. And so, as the divide was growing between Bengalis and non-Bengalis in the eastern wing of Pakistan, that is Bengal, these kind of events just fueled that divide. But the divide was really deeper. When you look at the military forces, only 10% of the military forces or 15% of the federal government offices, they were occupied by the East Pakistanis. Rest were mostly occupied by the West Pakistanis, and hence they held a lot of positions in power. They controlled the country, and that really dictated where all the budget was going. In fact, very interesting revelation took place in 1960s when a paper by the chief economist of Pakistan's Planning Commission came out, and it revealed that just 22, remember, 22, that's all, 22 Pakistani families owned 87% of the country's banking and 66% of the industries. And that was something that made people angry. Just 22 families, almost all of them from west of Pakistan, and they were controlling most of the country. And that was crazy, that level of inequality. And then in 1970, there was this really deadly tropical cyclone, and that caused havoc in the Bengal. So that again added troubles to Bengalis. But despite that, Pakistan went ahead, they had to at some point, and carried out the elections that were supposed to be held later that year. And on 7th December, when elections took place, the general elections all over the country, somewhere around 56 million eligible voters were there, and of them 57.7% people voted, and there was a clear winner. On the west side of Pakistan, different parties won in different provinces, but in east side, in Bengal, which was the majority province, out of 162 seats, 160 were won by Awami League, under the leadership of Mujibur Rahman. So clearly, he was supposed to be the next prime minister. But then there was another leader, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who was emerging at that time under the dictatorship of Ayub Khan. He had really grown up in ranks, and Bhutto also wanted to become the prime minister, so he flew to Dhaka and tried to work it out with Mujib that maybe we can do some kind of power sharing. But Mujib wasn't going to agree. He had won it fair and square. He was the leader of majority. So there was no agreement there. But once again, that was not going to be. Yahya Khan, who was then president of Pakistan, he ensured that Mujibur Rahman would not go on to become the prime minister, and he put Mujib in bars. And when the situation started growing out of control, because there were a lot of protests among the students, there was a lot of conflict going on between Bengalis and non-Bengalis. And then in the following year, 1971, in the March, he brought in forces and tried to suppress all kinds of protests that were going on. But it wasn't just suppression. They were going to go really brutal in the next few months. So the Pakistani army, it didn't want to turn Mujib into some kind of political martyr. So what they did was just arrested him. But at the same time, they made sure the leadership around him and other people who were important, and in fact, that just the circle got expanded constantly. When the execution started, they started executing those student leaders, journalists, important professors, academics, all the protesters that were there. They started killing so many people. This was called the Operation Searchlight, and it was really going to change the history of these two nations. And what happened next was termed as genocide in many ways. Um, there was selective targeting of Hindus in Bengal, but it wasn't just Hindus. They also targeted Muslims who were supporting Awami League. But it was the killing sometimes was so indiscriminate. Uh, the Pakistani army that couldn't figure out who was a friend or who was an enemy, and they just went on this killing spree and went hundreds and thousands of people. It's been very hard to tell the exact number of people that died in that operation. Some estimates go from the most conservative being 300,000 to the highest number being somewhere around 3 million. So you can think probably around a million or so people must have died. But it wasn't just about killing, so many got injured. Then rape was also used as a political tool in this suppression. In fact, there were reports and they were later verified that there were rape camps that were set up in the Pakistani army, and there were all kinds of Bengali women, and regularly they were getting the abortions done by certain Bengali doctors because the rape was being used as a tool to suppress the Bengalis. So when the army went on this full killing spree, and the intention of Yahya Khan was to save Pakistan from fragmentation, you can see it obviously had the opposite effect. So many ordinary Bangladeshis, they were not Bangladeshis at the time, I mean East Pakistanis or Bengalis rather, they took up arms and resistance began. And that's when this organization, or rather this militia kind of a unit was formed, which was called Mukti Bahini. And so many men and women, they joined it and they started fighting for it. So what about India? What was going on the Indian side? Initially, India was not quite keen on getting involved in this matter. But as the refugees started pouring in, and more of them came, at some point around 50 or 60,000 people were entering India through the porous borders of the then eastern Pakistan and India. They were coming in, and eventually millions of them, around 10 millions in total, they came to India. Then India had to take some step. In fact, Indian army had started in some way supporting Mukti Bahini around the border areas at that time. And Pakistan, on the other hand, it felt that, so it was a right decision to suppress Bengalis because after all, they were colluding with the Indian intelligence and Indian forces. So that went on for a while. A lot of violence took place. But to quite a large extent, Pakistani army was able to suppress Mukti Bahini forces, even though a lot of killing took place on both sides. And also, when the riots struck between Bengalis and non-Bengalis, Bengalis and Biharis, that also killed a lot of people. And when eventually India saw that so many refugees had came in and there was no other way, then the war eventually began. Both sides said that the other side began the war But if you just read the records, it suggests that India was right there going to start the war, and Pakistan kind of preempted it, and they made certain strikes, and that's when the war began. And in just a matter of 3 days, it began this war in somewhere in December 1971. But in 3 days, Indian Air Force had assured its superiority over the skies of Bengal, and it was quite dominating in that sense. Initially, on the western front, on the Punjab and Rajasthan, on these sides, Pakistan was doing pretty well. But as the war continued, especially in Bengal, Indian dominance was established. And then something else was going on here in terms of geopolitics. The US, which was siding with Pakistan at that point because of its Cold War reasons, it had turned its eye, rather blind eye, towards all the genocide that was going on in Bengal, and never really cared about human rights. So it had to support Pakistan, so it kind of justified whatever Pakistan was doing. But then when the war started, US sent its nuclear submarine. But at the same time, the Soviet Union, which was then on India's side, it also sent its submarine. So that kind of ensured that US was not really going to dominate India, and for some time it felt like this was going to turn into world war. And because China was also another player in it, and China was supporting Pakistan, but not really directly so far. It had its sympathies with Pakistan because it had fought a war with India. But Chinese leadership at the time was quite sensible. They maintained their distance, and I think it's probably because of that it didn't turn into a world war. So Chinese stayed away, and US and Russia, there was US that was going to come, but Russia was also there, Soviet Union rather, and India very quickly then ensured that they controlled most of the Bengal, and then get the Pakistani army sign the surrender document. And on 16 December 1971, the Pakistani army surrendered to India. 93,000 of their soldiers, some of them were, among them 93,000, I think some 10, 12,000 were also civilians. So 93,000, they were taken as prisoners of war, and they stayed in India for the next 2 years. But on the other hand, Bangladesh, that came into existence. Pakistan had been defeated, and a new country was created, which was then and even now known as Bangladesh. What happened to the relationships between India and Pakistan? They had turned sour, and after a while, when the true prime ministers of India and Pakistan, by the way, Bhutto had become the prime minister of India, prime minister of Pakistan then, and Indira Gandhi was the prime minister of India. They had a meeting, they had the agreement in Shimla, where eventually those prisoners of wars were released. Certain agreements on Kashmir were reached, that all these negotiations or discussions related to Kashmir will be just bilateral from now on. They won't go to a third country or the UN. That was discussed. But many critics suggest that Indira Gandhi at the time had the option to just solve the Kashmir issue right there. She could have done it. Probably that was a mistake. She could have made Bhutto agree that Kashmir is an integral part of India. And probably he would have agreed, and history might have been different. But that was not to be the case. So there it was, the final partition, and Bangladesh came into existence. And eventually we had from British India, which was one empire, it got bifurcated and then trifurcated and so on into so many segments, and so many different uh, countries came out of it. So that was the story of the partition of British India, based on Sam Dalrymple's book Shattered Lands. I'm sure you'd love to read the details, all of this, what was going on. I've just barely touched the surface, just the overall theme and overall narrative, what was going on there. But deep down there are so many details, whatever was going on the ground, in terms of military forces, in terms of political leadership. There are so many details and so many parties involved. Britain is involved, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, all these different nations, their people are involved. So it's quite a read, and I hope you'll enjoy it whenever you get a chance to read. And that's it for now with this book, and we'll continue reading and exploring different books in the next episode. And I'll catch you then. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.